particular guillotine I'll be sanctioned to.
Well, this will be a re-litigation of sorts, because if you remember,
we already have talked about it.
We did do it.
Watching it again, it kind of felt strange how much it felt like I was watching it for the first time, even though I had very vivid memories of when we did it on the podcast.
Interesting.
I don't know if that says anything about me or the film. Probably me.
Mm-hmm. Maybe both.
But my opinions on Mr. Cuarón are nowhere near as controversial as some of my other opinions. So.
You did not get a chance to watch Itu Mama, I assume.
No, it wasn't assigned. I don't know if we have it. I don't know if we have it assigned for later in my course. We probably don't, because we're probably just going to finish up Cuarón. But like, especially I'm particular. It's something that, as we read about it, it's something that comes up again and again. It's kind of a seminal Mexican film, and also kind of a transnational Mexican film.
I'll talk about it later, because that's another one that, well, it was assigned for the podcast, but only I watched it, and then I watched it again recently, and my opinion on it changed quite a bit, and it ties into my feelings on Roma and on Cuarón quite a bit, so I'll save that for later.
That'll be good, because I want to be very measured on Mr. Cuarón, particularly because his filmmaking eye is without comparison.
Yeah. And actually, this will be good, because Cuarón ties into the topic that I was planning to talk about today. So let's get started, shall we?
Yeah, I would talk about some other Chinese films, but I have no idea how to recommend them, because I don't know how you'd find them. Because if you even quote my professor, it's really hard to find these things, and just about all of them were in terrible shape when we saw them. So it's just one of those things that, like, I'm sure they're important, and I'm sure it changed somebody's life, but I just don't know how you get to them.
Okay.
Other than go to OSU and take Professor Denton's China film class.
Alrighty, well, welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show, everybody. We are back once again. I don't even know how to introduce this thing. So here we are.
There has been a good way to introduce it than to say, like, hey, we exist. This happens occasionally.
We do this.
We're going to talk about some movies.
We do this periodically, and we're here to talk about some movies. That's as good an intro as any. Okay. So, we've got a lot to dig into today. You may have heard some of that in the pre-show chatter, but of course, we will just dive right into what we have been watching. Garrett, do you want to take it away?
Yeah.
The first sacrificial lamb, as always.
Well, I'm more of a alpaca, but fine.
All right. Thank you for providing us with the title of this episode. Roughly a minute into the actual show. That may be some kind of land speed record. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Tyler.
No, it's good. That means I don't have to go.
This is what the show is for.
I've sometimes forgotten to find a title, and then I have to go madly scrambling through the episode as I'm uploading it, like trying to figure out what I should call it. Anyway, go on. I apologize. Okay.
So instead of watching my predisposed film that I disclosed at the last episode because I couldn't find it, and also due to time constraints, I watched a rather delightful late 50s Swedish film called Ansiktet, which translates to The Face, which translates to Ingmar Bergman's The Magician.
Oh, I don't know anything about this.
Neither do I, and I feel outflanked in film critic terms.
Please enlighten us.
Okay. Actually, it's been a little bit of a while, so bear with me. Okay. So it starts out with the magician. Of course, he is revealed to be tall and mute, but he travels well with a carriage coach, being the around 1840s or so, with an assistant, and then this rather pompous man that's sort of this mouthpiece for the whole troupe. And with his role, to be honest, a little strange, but 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 he's a delightful uh, presence, just being bombastic and whatnot. So anyways, they are on their way to Stockholm to give a performance, but then are apprehended by the police there, and then the troupe finds himself in this weird, I would say, censure role, if you will. Um, they are put to task by a doctor, the by the minister of health of the country, to essentially challenge him to change his mind, considering he's a complete skeptic on magic. And over the course through the film, um, there doesn't seem to be any way of pushing the minister's op- opinion, even after they do perform a little show for them, and then a constable, and then some other wealthy person that's there, just as a goof, really. Um, it's still hard for them to convince. Except tragically, at the end of the show, the magician falls dead after performing a rather risky maneuver, and he is and an autopsy is performed on him, which is when matters uh, begin to take a turn, because suddenly the Minister of Health conducting the autopsy finds himself haunted, and finds himself facing the supernatural. And of course, side note, of course, this is Ingmar Bergman. Um, you see this in Seventh Seal, and then that movie with the spider that is a metaphor for God that that appears at the end, whose title is escaping me, but that's a lovely image, and that's similar to what's going on, except I think it plays a lot more with setting, and plays a lot more with faces. Actually, this movie play, plays a whole lot with like the close up of faces, and then how stern they are, um, and really what messages they convey, especially the doctors. But anyways, and then
I have to say, just kind of looking at stills, it kind of seems like there's more of a constructed mise en scène than it's usually quite stark. Back like I think in Seventh Seal, like a lot of the times it's just, look at this nice forest we're in.
Yes,
and so forth. And though I also found this delightful quote. You're quite amusing. It's a shame you're dying.
Yes.
So this seems quite delightful and also quintessentially Swedish.
Yes, and then the minister, and then the movie ends with the Minister of Health finding that the magician never died, and then dissected a man, a homeless actor drunk instead, only for everyone to learn, even though viewers know well before this moment, that the magician isn't mute at all, and then therefore you sort of get the sense that their whole magic act loses their charm, and then they leave to go perform for the cane. Although you also get the sense that the troupe doesn't know where to pick up the pieces from, then that their act is sort of out of the bag, per se.
Is this a more light-hearted Bergman film?
Yes, I would say so.
Interesting.
There's a lot of side scenes that are whimsical, and like strange instances of romance that you wouldn't typically see in the Seventh Seal, for instance, because the Seventh Seal, and yeah, and part of me, I guess, for the whole thing was quite pleased how like this movie worked as parts of a whole, um, though they were separate and they were like semi vignettes because there was still like continuity and then like not so much like a full stop in between, and it also felt like they were converging, especially to the end in a reasonable paced way. So yeah.
Okay then.
This sounds like something I ought to damn watch.
Yes, it's also short.
Oh.
No, it's not. But but it's okay. And it's Swedish. This is. I don't think I've ever seen a Bergman film with this constructed of a set. So I found it refreshing in seeing that because usually seeing films that take place in a woods or in a barely furnished house with jump scare cock.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. Well, Bergman got like more adventurous with production design later in his career. I would urge you to watch Cries and Whispers, not only because that movie's great, but because it boasts some of the most inventive production design. Well, not the most inventive, but it has very fun production design and it's all very ornate. And what'd you say?
Would it be called a departure, or is there more kind of a curve as like Bergman gets more and more adventurous?
Hard to say because my experience of his oeuvre is hardly comprehensive, so I'm not really qualified to speak on that. Although also, if you think about it, Through Glass Darkly also has some great adventurous production design moments, like that great kind of haunted shipwrecked boat that they hang out in for a little bit. But yeah, interesting. Early Bergman is always interesting because he just made movies for like such a long time before he even got to the in the Pantheon classics. So cool, The Magician. I will have to check that out also.
There's a really good AV article on it. Though I don't think you can call any Bergman film overlooked because of the strength of his auteurism.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, what other films have you witnessed, Reed?
I bear witness to none other.
That is very acceptable. This is a very fine film to blow the one on.
Yes, indeed.
Regardless, again, I can't talk about Chinese film because I don't know how to recommend them, and all the cuts I saw were really terribly preserved. Like the only color one I saw, like it had this horrible post-scan red all over it. Even though like the colors without that would have been gorgeous. So that's a drop in the bucket. But Tyler, do you have anything you'd wish to discuss before we dive into a certain Alfonso Cuarón?
Yeah, I do actually. Give me a minute here. So, yes. So I went back. Funny enough, you may remember on our initial Powell and Pressburger episode way back when. Actually, I think that was only a year or so ago, or maybe it was 2. No, it was 2. It was 2. Okay. God, I can't keep anything straight anymore. Anyway,
how long we've been doing this thing?
I watched Black Narcissus alongside Colonel Blimp and the Red Shoes, and I always felt like I kind of gave Black Narcissus a little bit of short shrift just because Red Shoes and Colonel Blimp were both so amazing that Black Narcissus which was like a slight step down from those two. I felt like I didn't like it quite as much, but the point of all this rambling is that what
my general critique of it, I think I remember, was that Colonel Blimp is delightful from beginning to end. The Red Shoes is its kind of own fine type of technical delight. Black Narcissus is not here to delight you at all. And that is it. And that in itself is kind of a departure for Powell and Pressburger.
I might push back on that a little, but all this is to say, I rewatched this movie recently, and I kind of think it's a masterpiece. It's so interesting because it really is like a genuine, like erotically charged thriller. Like it is very like explicitly like a movie about like sexual desire and sexual tension, which is great because it's about like a group of nuns building this or trying to keep this not monastery, but this convent going kind of up in the remote mountains. It just kind of follows like that their efforts sort of slowly coming undone as one of them just kind of goes crazy and the others are all kind of slipping into their own sorts of not quite insanity, but they're slowly coming undone. And it just proves again that these guys were just miles ahead of everybody else at this time.
Yeah.
Because this movie was made in, I think, 1947.
Yeah, it was made
and
it feels like something that it feels like the sort of technically and thematically it feels like the sort of thing that would be made during the sexual revolution.
Absolutely.
But it's post World War II. It is absurd how they were able to get this thing made.
It feels absolutely of a piece with like kind of the explosion of European art cinema in like the early 60s, and it's really quite extraordinary. And the acting is great. Deborah Carr, who plays the kind of the three leading ladies in Colonel Blimp, plays the lead in this, and she is excellent. The kind of main nun who like becomes sort of the antagonist. I cannot remember that actress's name, but she's great. Just a real tour de force from Misters Powell and Pressburger. So highly recommend going back and giving that another look. Or if you haven't seen it before, going just to watch it.
Have you seen Peeping Tom?
Ooh, I still have not. No.
God, maybe just do that for the podcast because Peeping Tom is like that. Though I think it's very instructive that Peeping Tom came out like 13 years later, but it caused like a big controversy because of its treatment of voyeurism and sort of sexual terror. So I think maybe these two films are very much of a piece.
That could be. I'd be very curious to check that out. I've been meaning to watch it for such a long time, but I just haven't gotten around to it.
It's by far the most high-profile Powell and Pressburger film that I have not seen.
Yeah. All right, so there's that. Yes, because who could get to Peeping Tom when you're busy watching the Wachowskis' Speed Racer? Now, have either of you seen this movie or any parts of this movie at all?
I have witnessed very
some
brief
parts.
clips. I think maybe I have only really seen clips of it in the context of people are talking about the Wachowskis, and they show footage of Speed Racer in the background. But other than that, no.
Well, unquestionably, the best thing about this movie is the theme song that plays over the end credits, which mashes up the original Speed Racer theme song with some not great rap verses, but they're fun, and there's one in Japanese and there's one in Spanish for some reason, and then a chorus that is just amazing. So I really like that. This movie, it's just so misbegotten on so many levels, just because. I mean, the casting is all wrong. I mean, Emile Hirsch, like, I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's not given very much, but, like, he's just, like, the ultimate, like, blank slate protagonist. Well, I shouldn't say that, because Dane DeHaan and Valerian is a thing, but it's just, like, it so fully commits to like just being like a wash in CGI that it's almost admirable. Like literally this, I think this entire movie was filmed in front of a green screen. And
Yeah.
the effects obviously have not aged like super well, but like the colors really pop, and like you can tell the Wachowskis are really just kind of like letting it all hang out in terms of like they've been given just way too much money, and they are trying to do what they can with it, and also like they are trying something new, or at least they were trying something sort of new at the time. Like I think, you know, the the entirely, you know, CGI background kind of movie was something that people tried for a little bit there, and you know, it didn't really work out.
Didn't that kind of become Robert Rodriguez's kind of oeuvre for a little bit?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he did kind of have a hand in that. I don't know. It does sort of work for this movie, if only because like you can feel them really pushing to try to make this, you know, something of a live action cartoon in some ways. Um, but I don't know. It's also weirdly like kind of boring. Like a lot of the movie comes down to like behind the scenes like business negotiations and like contracts and that sort of thing. And there are some cool like racing sequences and some inspired touches. And also it's like a very like kind of straight ahead, like very sincere like family story. Like this is definitely a kids movie. Like it you know, and there are actually some surprisingly like touching moments. There's a nice little scene with the title character and his mom, played by Susan Sarandon. And you know, there's just nice little moments. John Goodman actually, I think, is pretty good in the movie. He is the sort of patriarch. He's having a good time, but again, it moves kind of weirdly. The pacing's all very strange. It's just like not great. As I think.
I'm curious, what prompted you to watch it?
Yes,
I had not seen it before. And my friends had seen it, and it was fun. It was a fun group viewing experience. And also, actually, I had seen like the first 15 minutes a few times, because the first 15 minutes are actually like really good. It opens very strongly and then very quickly downshifts. And there's just all kinds of bad choices in there. There's the little brother character runs around with a monkey the whole time and is pretty much insufferable.
I'm just looking at a still of this movie that has like John Goodman like looking at our titular Speed Racer, and it looks like he's performing in a porn parody. This looks like one of the most absurd things I've ever seen.
It's very weird.
I'm kind of curious.
I have to say, yes, I was also just sort of like morbidly curious about it. Because some people have sort of defended it, and it's one that
I have heard of people defending this movie, and I had a sort of similar morbid curiosity, never to go within like 50 feet of it, but curiosity nonetheless.
I will never be rushing to defend this movie per se, but I will say it has its merits. They are a little bit few and far between, but I don't know, still something of an interesting pop cultural artifact. If nothing else.
Yeah. One thing I find baffling is that, okay, so it's a Wikipedia page. Under production, there's animal cruelty incidents.
Yeah.
With the gems.
I feel like that was kind of overblown. I've read about that too. I think it was just like someone sort of in a moment of like, you know,
it sounds that way.
One of those, you know, loss of control moments that we all have. I think one of the crew members like slapped the chimp or something.
Yeah.
But I don't know, what have you. I don't want to be martyred for possibly advocating animal cruelty on the internet. Anyway, that's Speed Racer. And yeah, I have one more thing to talk about, and then I'll sort of lead into my main topic. I watched the... no, actually, he's done 2 other movies, but the sort of infamous movie from our old friend Kenneth Lonergan, writer-director of Manchester by the Sea, which is 2011's Margaret. You may not have heard of this movie. It's sort of infamous in film circles just because he shot it in, like, I want to say 2005, and then it was just mired in, like, post-production delays for years and years. Lonergan, like, just ran into trouble editing it. He could not get it to a place that he was happy with. The studio demanded that it, like, be within a certain runtime, and he wanted it to be longer and bigger and more expansive. It finally came out in 2011. It was just sort of dumped. Didn't make any money. But there was kind of a vocal contingent that advocated for it, and the studio let him go back in and do a director's cut, an extended cut, and that is the version that I watched. It is 3 hours long. I have to say, Kenny, yeah.
Ooh, on first name basis, that can never be good.
No, there is an excellent movie buried in there somewhere. Like, there is, like, this movie in some form, I think, could have been, like, a masterpiece on par with Manchester by the Sea. And I understand, like, why he did it the way he did, and, like, why he wanted it to be so huge and expansive. Because the movie centers on this high school student played by Anna Paquin, whose name is not Margaret. Her name is Lisa. And she is, like, sort of complicit in this accident that happens where someone dies, and the movie just kind of, like, follows her day to day as, you know, she continues to live her life after this traumatic thing has happened, but also she's dealing with it, and she doesn't quite know how to process it. It really is one of the great coming-of-age movies that I've seen, just because its depiction of, like, a teenage character is, like, one of the most real and, like, fully developed that I've ever seen. Like, she acts, you know, strangely and sometimes contradictorily from scene to scene, and, you know, will be volatile and unlikable and, you know, change her mind and change her position on things like the way that teenagers do. And, you know, she is really kind of a boldly, like, unlikable character. Like, she does some pretty despicable things in this movie. But Anna Paquin is really kind of a magnetic screen presence, and I found the character pretty compelling.
I've always defended Anna Paquin. I think she's done some really good work.
Yeah, she's really great. I like her a lot. Seems to have been on a bit of a brief run of playing high school students who how can I put this delicately? Between this and 25th Hour, there's something of an overlap. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But it's the point of the movie is that, like, you know, we all think we are kind of the center of the story in the life that we're living, or, like, you know, when you're younger, you kind of think that you are the center of the universe, and you have trouble kind of relating to other people and seeing things from other people's perspectives, that sort of thing. This movie is really kind of a bold attempt to tackle that theme on really kind of as big a canvas as possible. It's 3 hours long. It's expansive. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of kind of subplots and twists and turns and things going on. just kind of really interested in like the messiness of real life, as I think Lonergan tends to be.
Okay.
So what's wrong with it?
Yeah, so it's just too much. Like I understand why he did this. I understand what he was going for. But I think just after a while it starts to get exhausting. Like I think that there's a lot in there that doesn't necessarily need to be there. I really think he could have pared this down to like a 2-hour movie and focused it a little more. And I think that would have been stronger. And I think he still could have gotten his point across that way. And again, there's like a really like a long stretch in the middle that's really kind of transcendent. And there's just a lot of great stuff kind of packed in there. But yeah, it's a little too meandering for its own good. It gets a little too big. There's just, some kind of subplots that are just like less interesting. Anything, that tries to be this, this expansive, often can kind of get lost a little bit, and clearly he did, because he was editing it for 6 years. So I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece. There are definitely like masterpiece level moments and scenes and sequences in it, but I think it just is kind of undone by its own ambition. Really one of those just kind of like flawed, super ambitious, passion project kind of movies that we tend to be interested in. Yeah.
Apparently, if Wikipedia is to be believed, Scorsese and his editor contributed to a 165-minute version.
Yes, they did. That cut has never seen the light of day, apparently. Yeah. I'd be curious to see it. Scorsese is a big fan of this movie, apparently, so take that for whatever it's worth. But there you go. That is Margaret.
Okay, that's very interesting, I gotta say.
It sounds like it sounds like, I guess, a tour de force in one way of talking about protagonist disease, which I think is what you were getting at, perhaps.
Protagonist disease?
Yeah, it's like it's the belief of being the main character of the unit.
I see.
Yeah.
I don't think it goes that far. It's more just about like, kind of that everyday narcissism that everybody has, and that you kind of have to like live your life, but also can, stunt empathy in certain ways. It's really a movie about growing up and coming to kind of understand how society works in a lot of ways. So that's that. So then to kind of segue into my main topic here, which will lead us to Mr. Cuarón. So I've been thinking a lot lately, because I watched a couple of movies. I watched my first Michelangelo Antonioni movie, which was La Notte, The Night. And I watched another movie by Mr. Nicholas Roeg, who passed away recently, who directed Don't Look Now, and another movie that I saw called Insignificance. I watched his movie starring David Bowie, The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, these both kind of got me thinking, and this is an issue that I sort of often think about, but it's one that's been kind of hanging on me lately, which is that, can you, or really, like, what is the value of, like, movies that are just examples of, like, really, really good, like, craft, but, the other elements of them are somewhat wanting? Because I think I've noticed this, which is that in film discourse, a lot of the time, critics will tend to, like, elevate movies that just have, like, really, really well done, like, really solid, or, like, just above and beyond, like, levels of filmmaking craft. And while I can certainly
very impressive formalism sometimes, like that's kind of the Inarritu oeuvre. It's just like formalism, just right there in your face. Like, what story?
Yeah, and I don't want to go quite that far, but I think that there are a lot of movies where like the story is good, the characters are like pretty good or okay, but like the craft is just like amazing. Mm-hmm. And I think those are the kinds of movies that often get like a lot of praise that I tend to sort of push back on because I find it hard to appreciate like good craft for its own sake. I mean, I do appreciate it like in isolation. Like Nicholas Roeg is kind of the example that I always go back to because I have not loved a movie of his yet. Like I've seen 3 of them now, and I do love his style and his approach to filmmaking. He has a very distinctive like style of cinematography and editing. It's really incredible to see happen on screen. But just I've just had a hard time connecting with the stories that he's telling. And that's difficult. And there's sort of the same thing with the Antonioni movie because I think the central concern that he often addressed was like sort of the emptiness of society and the emptiness of people like living in modern society. And this movie is very much about that. Which made it for me like pretty hard to connect with because like it's more focused on subtly commenting on society than actually engaging with these characters. But also just the filmmaking in it is really astounding, and like there are these shots that are just incredible, and sort of like a high contrast cinematography style that's I like would often just kind of be in awe of what I was looking at. But again, I just had a hard time connecting with the movie. So I'm really struggling with this. So I sort of struggle with like how far can craft alone sort of elevate a movie. Not to say that like a movie that only has good craft, but like a movie that sort of gets to like, I don't know, like a B minus level with its storytelling and with its characters, but then the filmmaking is like at an A plus level. And that leads us to Alfonso Cuarón.
I'm going to use another example real quick because I'm going to bring up the specter of 2015's The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Ooh, okay.
A film which is just kind of like a run-of-the-mill kind of Cold War thriller that is elevated by a very just fascinating formalist style that just goes all in with colors, all in with soundtrack, but also that film has the benefit of just like really charming performances. Mm. I think that is that might be the only good Henry Cavill performance. But I think what it comes down to is that there's a few ways this comes forth. Sometimes the plot's just not very good. Sometimes the formalist elements, instead of complementing storytelling, kind of go rogue, as in, like, I'm going to use Bergman as an example. I really like Bergman. I think Bergman's really fascinating, but there's a very strong argument to be made that its formalist elements of, like, ooh, it's all one shot, actually takes away from it.
Yeah. More
than it actually adds to it. But again, that's kind of an example where I actually really like the kind of core story, so I'm fine with that. I think what it has to be, because filmmaking is, even in like very disparate experimental circles, about storytelling. Mm. And formalist elements, as much as they can gather a life of their own, are storytelling tools. And if formalist storytelling fails, but it's kind of just impressive on its own right, like sometimes it's just an incredible shot, or just like an incredible like use of camera movement, or sometimes you just get like a really you get an emotional reaction from the image on screen, but not actually what's happening on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Like that happens to me pretty often, whereas I'm just not concerned about what's actually happening, but the image on screen is just really compelling, and not just in like an ooh that's a nice looking shot, but maybe they just get like a really great actor's headshot, and like that just like speaks to me in a way that the story isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think what it comes down to is kind of if there's like a distance, if there's a sort of differential between what the story is and how the film is telling it. I think that kind of, yeah, I really like how it's made, but I'm not sure about it. That might come up. And I think time to move on to Mr. Cuarón.
Okay. Oh, wait. I just want to say, just one thing about The Man Who Fell to Earth, though. I will say that it's an interesting sort of critique. Actually, these two movies are kind of interestingly linked because like they're both sort of commenting on sort of the malaise of modern society.
Yeah.
David Bowie plays an alien that comes to Earth and is sort of captured by various sort of earthly vices in a weird way. And I will say, I just wanted to add that David Bowie gives a really good performance. He's perfectly cast, of course. Mm-hmm. This is sort of a role that was made for him, but I also think he's doing some really good and very sort of empathetic work. So I just wanted to shout that out.
He's a damn good performer, through and through.
Oh, yes. But anyway, on to Cuarón. So, yeah. So I did kind of a big rewatch of his movies recently because I wanted to write something about him, and that still has not quite come together because my reactions to the movies have been sort of different than I had been expecting, and also I was sort of modifying my approach to it. But you go ahead and sort of lead into this.
Okay, let's start with Children of Men.
Yeah.
Because I had to watch this for my Latin American film class because we're talking about transnational cinema, and Children of Men is a very perfect film to talk about that with, because it's Mexican-born director, though he's lived in London for a lot of his life. Sort of English writer, English directors. It kind of concerns it has like a very global scope. It's a very interesting way to talk about it.
Uh-huh.
The filmmaking craft in it is incredible.
Oh yeah.
Some of the long takes that are achieved are just breathtaking. There's just a really fascinating use of mise en scène. Like I remember there's a point where he goes to like an abandoned school, and there's just the light pouring in through the broken glass, and you see like the lone pregnant woman in the world sitting on the swing set as he's just kind of staring at her through the broken glass. That's just an incredible image. There's another point where the head of the fishes and his former lover is shot, and you see them burying her in the background, and he's just like by a tree, just distraught and destroyed.
Yeah.
Incredible image. I think the script's kind of crap.
Well, okay.
And I'll roll that back, but I don't think it's that good. And I'll let you take the floor, Tyler.
No, I wouldn't say it's crap by any means, but no, there is some sort of clumsy exposition in there, some dialogue that's a little, shaky. It's interesting because I think this movie has like I think 4 credited screenwriters, and I think 2 of them are also credited on writing the first Iron Man movie, and that sort of makes sense because when you drill down a little bit with this movie, it is kind of like a sort of like generic. Not generic, but like a pretty straight ahead like thriller kind of plot that has this kind of really cool world building and sci-fi elements kind of layered on top of it.
And just with an incredible director behind the helm.
Yes.
And also, I can only assume that there's like a lot of times that that like Cuarón came in and said, no, we're not having this exposition. I'm just gonna fucking film it, and we're gonna end when I say we do.
Mm.
But I think my issue is I'm just not very into the world building.
Okay.
My issue is it's not that I disagree with the themes of the film, sort of trying to like give a rebuttal to anti-immigration policies and just like austere racism, and also just kind of, and also it also has a very curious eye to violence. Like I think I just keep thinking back to the scene where like we're panning through the war-torn city, and there's a point where blood gets on the camera. Apparently, that was a mistake.
Oh yeah.
If that's believed, and you can kind of tell in the shot, but it's kind of this notion of a film that's hyper aware of the violence that's occurring on screen, and I will always get behind that. The issue is that a lot of it just happens to be through straw men. And like political opinions are kind of given by people where it seems like the only thing going on in their life is to give these political opinions. Like I kind of there's a point in this film where we go to a place that's called the Ark, which is the Battersea Power Station turned into an art museum / sort of depository. Yeah. And there's a guy there who runs it, and he only talks about the art. And he only talks about like, oh yeah, Rome falling was very bad for the art world, and some necessarily, people live there too, right? and it just kind of seems that like people's only position is to give their particular prescribed philosophy and then move on. There's also a kind of particular habit the movie has with associating people very closely to whatever identity they had before they got to England, such as they go into the house of a Russian man who has a little thing of Lenin and Orthodox icons on their thing. There's a point where there was marching. I can only assume they're supposed to be. Actually, I don't know their background, but they're holding Arabic signs, yelling "Allahu Akbar" and holding AK-47s. Yeah, which I have questions about. But that's kind of some of my like base issues with the world building. We can kind of go from there.
So, mind if I interject? Because certainly. Because I've seen parts of this movie, but never like the whole of it. So maybe I shouldn't talk about this movie. But or rather, I'm just reading about do you ever get a sense of like a sense of symbolism that like tries to unite the script with the visuals, perhaps?
Well, I don't think this is a case where the formalist elements actually kind of inhibit the storytelling. I think, in fact, they do quite a lot to elevate it. I just don't think the storytelling is just that good to begin with.
Well, see, that's interesting. I think he does augment it in some interesting ways. Like, I think he's talked about, Cuarón has talked about how like one of the key kind of influential touchstones for this movie was the Battle of Algiers, which is this kind of neorealist movie that is centered on like an actual, revolution and like guerrilla war that took place. And it's done all kind of newsreel style and documentary style. And this movie also kind of has that sort of, handheld, like, documentarian approach to its cinematography.
There's also lots of, like, news feed footage everywhere. People are watching televisions.
And there's these great moments in a lot of the movie where the camera will kind of, like, drift over to, like, other people, like, who are not the main characters, just to kind of, like, show you, like, the human cost. Like, that is honestly kind of the main character in this movie is, like, the human suffering on display. So it's sort of a humanist movie in that regard. My
issue with that, and I'll let you get back. My issue with that is that sometimes they pan over and they're speaking a foreign language, and the film refuses to subtitle it, which is a very interesting choice, and that's something worth talking about earlier. But kind of the main result is kind of people kind of become indescribable, distant, visibly and verbally foreign. which is something I'm curious, like whether if you actually spoke German or Arabic or Spanish or any of the other languages when we pan to them and we see that. I'm curious how they would view that, but I think sometimes it kind of sands things down to a certain level, but I'll let you get back to the argument you're making.
That's interesting. Well, that opens up some other cans of worms that
I apologize for opening them in the space.
They're discussing, but I don't know. It's weird, and I kind of don't feel comfortable addressing that, but I do think that, I do think there's a lot of humanism, in this movie and in the filmmaking.
That humanism is what this movie strives for.
Yeah.
I cannot help but say that.
And I also think that, like, when it does, like, for me, the best stretch of this movie is, like, the back end, when they go into that refugee camp, and it's just kind of chaos, and the kind of big final battle starts happening, and, you're just kind of in the streets.
The most showy of the oneers happen.
Yeah, and all that. But here's my thing. So we talk about these oneers, and this actually gets back to kind of whether the craft, like, augments the story or not. I do think, like, when he does just kind of let it be that sort of documentarian, like, kind of roving camera approach, I think that does work. I have sort of turned around, and I know this is going to cause, like, a lot of vitriol, or it would, if anyone cared about this or this show, or if I, like, had any kind of an actual platform, but I don't think the car shot really serves his purpose very well. Like, it's done in this way.
Which car shot? Because there's two I can think of at the time. Is the one where they're escaping?
No, it's like the car shot, like the one that's like inside the car, like that the sort of the centerpiece sequence that this movie is famous for. That whole thing where you're inside the car with everybody, and then you go outside the car at one point, and then you back in or whatever. Because it's just weird to me, because that is not like a documentary style shot at all. Is it shaky? Does it ever really shake? It shakes a little, but like it's much more like kind of a like, ooh, look what we did, like this cool long take kind of moment. And right. I think that sort of detracts, like, from what from the chaos. And like, I have never, watching that scene, like, felt the chaos or the suspense that I feel like you're supposed to feel in that scene, because I feel like I'm just watching, like, a fucking, like, video game, like, not a cutscene, but, like, I feel like I'm watching something, like, sort of preordained or pre-programmed sort of play out in front of me.
Henry. I think you're on to something.
And I think, not all of the oneers in the movie are like that, and which is another reason why that one sort of calls out.
I kind of feel similarly about the shot where they're escaping, and, like, there's one point where, like, the car's at, like, the bottom of the hill, and they're trying to start it, and you just see the fishes, like, running in the background, and it's funny. Well, they look silly because they're just there in the background and they're running, and you hear them yelling. I think that's a moment where I think that suspense has really gotten out of it. The thing about that, like, the big car shot, is that, if I'm not mistaken, that shot ends with them looking at, like, the dead policeman, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a piece of brilliance. Of the car goes away, and we stay with the acts of violence. We are not going to underplay the violence of the fishes.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good moment.
And I think that is brilliant. And I think I just don't mind it. I'm not necessarily sure that terror is necessarily what you're supposed to. Actually, I'm not sure really what the intention of it, because we actually don't know all that much about any of the characters in the car at that point.
Yeah, well, then that's another thing, is that, like, most of the characters in this movie are kind of blank slates to a certain degree.
But, like, when the head of the fishes dies, when she's shot in the neck, it's kind of a sense of, like, oh, what was I supposed to feel here?
Yeah, right.
I'm not quite sure that's a failure of filmmaking. I'm more concerned about that as a failure of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are issues with that scene. I'm not quite sure I agree it's necessarily the one. I do kind of agree that, like, there's an argument to be made. It does kind of feel like hardcore Henry.
Well, I mean, clearly it works for a lot of people. Like, I don't know. I have just sort of, I have sort of drifted away from that sort of like long take, like cinema verite. Well, not cinema verite, but that sort of, you know, let's let it all, you know, play out in the one shot sort of mindset in terms of my sensibilities. I don't know.
I'd be lying if I'm kind of in the same mode. I'm not sick of the oneer, but I'm more weary of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain times in this movie where I'm just, and I think this is going to be something when we get to Roma. There are just certain points in the movie where I just go like, man, I just want a close up.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yep.
God damn it! Like, yeah, this is gorgeous, but fucking, just give me a big stupid look at his face. I just want faces sometimes.
Well,
sometimes just like a face is the most like human thing you can show.
Well, yeah, and actually, this is something that I was thinking about a lot when I was kind of, you know, rewatching these movies. That he doesn't often use close-ups, and like that is weird. And I get it that you know, close-ups are kind of like hand-holdy. And you know, there's sort of the obvious choice sometimes, but like, I don't know, man, like sometimes something is the obvious choice because it works. And
I think, look, the close-up is one of the core tenets of filmmaking, and I think right from the beginning we've learned this since like the Kuleshov effect, that sometimes the most effective thing you can show a person is a face.
Yeah.
And I think, and granted, I don't think that Cuarón needs to like just go back and radically change his filmmaking style. I just think he needs to like sometimes give up the oneer and give us a close up.
I completely agree.
So like, yeah, I'm glad we agree on this, because that was something I think I was thinking about it in like the escape scene, because that's where like, to me, the oneer just feels the most egregious, where I'm just like, did you need this? Like, I guess it's fun because like we're following the car and so forth, but there's sometimes I'm like, you know, we could just cut.
Well, I kind of like that one. I guess we're sort of on different sides of the coin here, but I like that one just because I think
we're swirling around the same drain here, though. So
yeah,
I think we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, we're sort of approaching different parts of this from the same sort of perspective. I don't know. The reason I like that one is I think that the suspense actually kind of works for me there, just because like, you know, you're sort of, it's sort of like a real time kind of, you know, tracking them as they're making their escape. I don't know, that kind of works for me. But
you're not quite sure who's gonna die.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that.
So I think so. What is kind of our final opinion, though? Because I'm not going to go back and reopen those cans of worms about like humanism and so forth. I don't think this is the platform for that.
No, and that's not really what our kind of forum topic is. But I think Children of Men is like a really well made movie that's got a lot of like you know, really high points, and it's got certainly more than its fair share of merits. I think the ending in like the last kind of sequence of it is kind of beautiful. But I don't think it's like the all-time classic that a lot of people kind of hold it up as.
I think in some places it's mediocre.
Mm.
And that is not and that's not necessarily a shot at Mr. Cuarón or necessarily all his filmmaking. I think his kind of place is not as like an audacious auteur. I think is a deserved one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does quite a bit to elevate this film and I think some of the filmmaking in it is just utterly brilliant. I just wish maybe a couple less writers, maybe one more draft. Maybe just a fucking close up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty cold to this movie.
Okay.
Even though I can't call it a bad movie, obviously, but it's not really. It was just kind of something where I was watching. I'm like, oh, great, this part now. So.
Yeah, I certainly sympathize, even if I think I maybe like it a little bit more than you. But it's sort of interesting that after making this movie, he then went off and spent 7 years working on maybe the pure, like, all-craft movie, which would be 2013's Gravity, which I don't want to spend too much time on because I'm much more interested in discussing Roma, but...
Yeah, and I haven't seen Gravity because when it came out, I just had no interest in seeing it.
Here's just what I will say about Gravity is that, again, like, lots of breathtaking, like, filmmaking moments in it. It's a very simple, you know, story when it comes down to it. Another one where the characters aren't that well fleshed out. Also, there's a scene late in it that is just terrible, where you can feel him highlighting and underlining, like, guys, this is a metaphor. This is a metaphor for the main character's journey. Are you getting this? Which is just not good. But
Mr. Cuarón, are you sure about this? They need to know. They need to know.
Yeah. But it's good. It's well made.
I'm interested in it.
And I wonder.
Eventually, I'll get to it.
I just wonder why. Well, you should see it. But I wonder why he felt like he needed to spend so long making that particular movie and telling that particular story. It's very, very strange to me. I'm always fascinated by the projects directors choose to take on.
I can't. Maybe look. I can't get into his head. Maybe that was just he just like had dreams of like look, I've been there as like a visually inclined artist that like dreams of space and like, oh my god, space is gorgeous. I need to put this on film. This is an experience people need to have, and maybe it just wasn't as great as what was in his head. And you know, sometimes we make mistakes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we spend too long on the wrong things. It happens.
It's true. But anyway, after that, he took another rather long, well, not hiatus, but he took a long time to get his next project out. But that project was 2018's Roma, which many have hailed as the best movie of this past year. Black and white, set in Mexico City in the 1970s, follows a housekeeper, based extremely heavily on his own Cuarón's own recollections of his childhood and his childhood kind of housekeeper / nanny that lived with the family. He dedicated the movie to her. The main character Cleo is very much based on that person.
Also kind of based on kind of subtle racial politics. The film uses both the indigenous Mexican language and Spanish.
Yep.
Which is why there's like when you watch it, there's a little subtitle description at the very beginning, which I think is an admirable choice. I'm very glad that happened.
Yeah. I always love that when kind of the language sort of factors into it, because the Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden also has something like that, where Japanese dialogue is one color and Korean dialogue is another color, and that factors into things.
I need to see The Handmaiden.
Oh, it's amazing. But anyway, so Roma, very, kind of like low-key sort of story, you would think. But no, it is shot not 70 millimeter, but on sort of the digital equivalent of that, very large.
Yeah, you can go to the Gateway here and go see it on a 70 millimeter print.
Ooh.
You have to pay $15, and I got fucking time for that, so I watched it on Netflix, like the rest of us.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to see this movie in theaters, not on a print, unfortunately. But yeah. So, John, what did you think of this movie?
The thing that struck me the most is that this is a movie about backgrounds. This is a movie about what's happening in the background, what's happening around the mise-en-scène, like what characters are running here, what events going on. I remember there's a point where Cleo is in the movie theater with pretty much her boyfriend Famin at the time, and she tells her, I missed my period, I think I'm pregnant. And then he runs away. But the way that scene is arranged is all you notice is just the film in the background, like the audio in it is like really loud. You can barely hear Cleo and Airman, and it just dominates the screen. And I'm just like, what a strange choice. Because this isn't like the other things. Like there are points where, like, particularly when like the protests are happening and like they rush the department store, and that's where like her water breaks. Like that's a moment where kind of like the loud, over-oppressive background really matters, or like where the earthquake happens. But in that case, I'm just kind of thinking, again, a close-up is okay. We've been using them for decades.
Yeah.
I thought that would have been the best choice. And it becomes a film less about Cleo and kind of more about the world around her, which I think is a feature. I'm not going to call that a bug.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm just not as interested in the world around her as I am in kind of her journey as an indigenous housekeeper serving a white family kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
And with its own kind of issues.
Well, now, here's sort of my response to that, which, it's interesting because Cuarón, it seems, for almost his entire career, has sort of been interested in doing that, just sort of like drawing your attention away from like what's ostensibly the main story and to the background and what's happening around the main story. Like Children of Men does that. Y Tu Mamá Tambien does that a lot. I'll come back to that. And this movie also does it. This movie does something that I've sort of been interested in doing for a while, which is sort of letting an ostensibly like more dramatic story kind of play out in the background, like the whole kind of divorce domestic drama that's happening. Like
the kids just being kids and kind of growing up.
Yeah. He just kind of plays that stuff like, kind of on the fringes of the main story, which is, Cleo's sort of day-to-day experience. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been meaning to rewatch this movie because I think it deserves me giving it another look. And I just haven't had the time to do that yet. But now, so to talk about, to get back to this close-up thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the scene on the beach at the end.
Yeah.
Now, when I saw this movie, I sort of felt like that scene, sort of like just almost derailed the movie. Quite frankly, I've sort of mellowed on that, and I want to watch this movie again, but he really does handle the sort of Cleo's relationship with the family like in a very sensitive and delicate way for a lot of the movie. And then you get to that scene and she saves the kids, and then like you have this moment where she kind of has like her kind of emotional climax, and we're still fucking 5 feet away, so we can get this beautiful tableau of like the family, all kind of coming together.
Because damn it, they worked on that ocean.
Yeah, and to me, that scene, I think, yes, absolutely would have benefited from just cutting to a goddamn close-up. Because I think you would have felt that, the emotional climax of the movie a little bit more.
Has a face. This actress is really good. She can do this.
Yeah. And, like, also, it just felt sort of weird and sort of weirdly, like, disingenuous to me to after, doing a whole movie, where you have handled, this relationship between like the privileged and the underprivileged in a very sensitive way, to have, them all be like, oh, we love you, Cleo. Like that to me felt very much like Cuarón, and that tableau felt to me it felt very much to me like Cuarón kind of being like, yeah, actually, you know what? Like we didn't always treat her great, but we were pretty good to Lebo. You know, I'm gonna pat myself on the back a little bit.
It feels like Cuarón, and maybe this is something that just kind of comes up when you do sort of these kind of semi-autographical things, like your kind of own romanticization, because I can't blame Cuarón for romanticizing his past. He was a child.
Yeah.
And he's portraying his child. There's going to be a certain kind of a romanticization, but kind of the go from. I just think it's not. I don't think it's offensive, but I'm just very underwhelmed by how this film handles class and racial dynamics.
Yeah.
Reed?
It
You don't have to raise your hand, by the way.
But I feel like I do, because I feel like because I want to also like make Tyler have a hard time and like trying to like piece out my stuff and whatnot.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
That's fine.
But anyways, yeah, it sounds like this movie could use some more nuance in its critiques as well, especially if it's considered that it seems focused on the world like outside, rather.
Yeah, well, it's weird because I think as a filmmaker, Cuarón really takes this. You know, he is a humanist, but he takes this very sort of external approach, where
like in Children of Men, we were kind of talking about this in our class. Was kind of its kind of idea is no politics is good.
Well,
like it kind of views the government and the fishes as kind of like equal organizations. I'm like, no, it's not quite what's going on here.
It's not even that. It's more like, you know, his camera. Like what?
Maybe like a problem with being intimate with like the characters and like the source with like the text at work, maybe.
Well, that's sort of what I'm getting at, because like his filmmaking is always done in very observational style, camera always roving, always moving. Again, not a lot of close-ups. What?
Meticulous mise-en-scène.
Meticulous mise-en-scène, but like always just like looking at things and looking at people, but like not really adopting their perspective and not really like digging, like using the filmmaking to enhance the characters necessarily.
I think in the case of Roma, I think what happens is that the movie tries to tell a story about a member of a disenfranchised person, and then through formless means, and then those formless means then disenfranchise her. The theme of the movie kind of morphs and kind of goes on to kind of go on. It's the family that actually matters. Cleo is an observer. And I don't like that at all.
Well, I think there is something to be said for like how, you know, as you say, he's always kind of like, you know, focusing on the world, like how he kind of, you know, uses that technique to sort of, you know, place her in this world and kind of, you know, show you her place within this world.
And sometimes that works brilliantly.
Sometimes he's very successful at it. Yeah,
like, I think a lot of the hospital scenes I really adore.
Oh yeah,
like,
yep.
The earthquake, great. Like when she's stillborn, that is heartbreaking.
Yeah,
that is a great use of that kind of external, kind of far off, distant camera.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. With the beach, it becomes not malicious, but misintended.
I think so. And now, you know, it was pointed out to me somehow that, you know, after that scene happens, like, she is kind of, like, pushed off to the side again, like, by the family, which I think is meant to illustrate, you know, again, like, kind of what that relationship is. Like, he does that very effectively and kind of more explicitly earlier on in the movie, like where she's like trying to sit down with the family to watch TV and they keep asking her to like get up and get them things. And she's kind of like sitting off to the side, like from the couch where the rest of the family is sitting. That's all very well done. But yeah, I think what this movie kind of lands on is just a little too, it feels a little too self-congratulatory for me.
No, you're right.
In the direction of the privileged family. And also, like, I didn't think Cleo was like that richly developed of a character.
I think it's a case of, I don't think she talks enough. Like, the people around her are talking all the fucking time. The family are just a bunch of chatterboxes. So the fact that she is so silent.
It's not even, I wouldn't say it's that so much. Okay. It's more that, like, again, this goes back to the close-up thing. Like, you don't see, it's hard to get a bead on, like, what she's thinking or what she's feeling sometimes, just because she's so stoic, and you're never, like, really, like, just, well, not never, you are sometimes, and when you are, it works brilliantly, but, like, too rarely are you just, like, with her, like, next to her, like, looking, not just, like, seeing her from a distance, but really, like, looking at her and, like, watching her and, like, being like, what is she thinking and what is she feeling?
I remember there's a point where she's cleaning the dog shit off, like, the driveway, and the close-up's on the shit. And then, like, later on, we, like, pan to the dog, as if, like, the dog's the important thing in the scene. It is such a weird shot. And I think you're onto something there. Like, I think it's a case of, I think this is kind of the ultimate case of, like, formalism, just, like, your kind of distant, aloof, mise-en-scène focused style kind of distances us from a character we're not supposed to be distant to. Because I think we're supposed to empathize and, like, relate and associate with Cleo more than any other character in the film, and sometimes we just don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes we aren't allowed to. And sometimes that's very effective, but other times it feels very misguided.
I pretty much agree. Just one more.
Sorry.
Oh, well, I was just one more point, sort of, that I want to make. So, Y Tu Mamá También, I sort of alluded to earlier. Film Cuarón made much earlier in his career. Came out in 2001, I think. Very different story. Sort of focuses on these two teenage boys who are, it's another kind of coming of age story, but it has these other kind of layers to it that only sort of gradually come to the fore. It takes place against the backdrop of, like, the sort of change of power in Mexico. I think, like, in 2000, like, the opposition, like, won the election for, like, the first time in, like, 75 years or something crazy like that.
It was like this land, because, like, Mexico was, like, for so many years pretty much a one-party state, and then that suddenly changed.
Yeah. That stuff is all, like, kind of hovering in the background of Y Tu Mamá. And that movie also kind of takes this sort of, like, documentarian approach in its filmmaking, but it's also got, like, this sort of self-reflexive technique that makes it feel like more of a documentary. And it engages with, like, the issues of class, and it sort of deals with, the sort of social changes happening in Mexico and sort of the people, on the, not the fringes of society, but people, in, the lower classes and sort of what their life is like. You sort of get brief glimpses into that. And he does that, like, I think the first time I saw that movie, I was kind of turned off by that, because it felt like he was kind of getting in his own way of, like, the story he was telling. But then I went back and watched it again, and I realized, like, oh no, actually, what he's doing really very masterfully in this movie is, using this sort of weird and kind of, not goofy, but, like, on the surface, less pressing, less urgent, like, less serious story, to explore these issues and to sort of, give you glimpses into these things. And I think that movie deals with all those issues in a really compelling way that would have served Roma well, I think. So I sort of think that movie, that Y Tu Mama Tambien, I think Cuarón would benefit from going back to that movie and sort of looking at what his approach was there. Because again, it's a very self-reflexive movie. There's like an omniscient narrator. There's like a lot of like cutting away and stuff like that. That just, Roma's a very, very different movie, and that approach wouldn't fit for it at all. But I think there's something to be said for like, the way he allows other things and external things and the themes and social messages that he's dealing with to kind of creep in and come to the fore. So I don't know.
I think kind of what we are coming to is that if as a filmmaker, the film you're making doesn't exactly tell the story you want it to tell through formalist means, then you have to step back and see how to fix that. And I think sometimes it's and it's not always about like indulgent filmaking, about like like this beautiful, like wonderful shot that actually doesn't really tell a story, but it's wonderful. It's more about sort of like who is the camera looking at, and where do our eyes go? And I think that scene in the movie theater where my eyes are looking at the film, not Cleo. And I think that's exemplatory of kind of the worst instincts of the movie. Though again, I don't want to disregard Roma out of hand. It's gorgeous. When it works, it's actually brilliant. Its acting is wonderful. You kind of feel these like very personal touches throughout it. I do not want to deride it. I'm just skeptical of it.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat, and I struggle with it just because Cuarón is so clearly, a master director, and I wonder if it is if I'm like just sort of missing the point of what he's doing, or if he actually has these blind spots. I go back and forth on that. I have been thinking about this a lot, and I kind of have not really arrived at any conclusions yet.
That's kind of where I'm at, because like after Children of Men, I was very thinking of like, is this like a script issue? Is this a filmmaking issue? During Roma, I'm kind of thinking like, what is my issue here? Like, why do I feel just so apathetic about these characters, about this setting? And I think I've arrived at something resembling closure, but again, I'm still searching as well. I can't really find an answer to it. Particularly, I don't think the answer is, Mr. Cuarón, you need to change your filmmaking style. Yeah,
no, I wouldn't want him to necessarily, but
because he's one of, again, I think, granted, maybe a thing I'm coming at is maybe he should just be less of an auteur and just stop fucking writing this stuff. But men like him are really, really helpful in the cinematic landscape. These like really audacious, really ambitious auteurs with really ambitious styles, and like as problematic. And even though we have come to problems, I think the cinematic world is very much better for Mr. Alfonso Cuarón.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, that's why I'm so frustrated by all of this that we have been discussing. So yeah, that's that. And again, just like he's a master of his craft, but I think that his craft sometimes gets in the way of the story that he's telling, and that is frustrating to me.
I think maybe he just needs somebody in the editing room to be like, no. I know you spent all this time, but we have. I think it's the phrase like "cut your ghoulies." Like the thing you love the most, cut it. I think maybe that's some advice, and that's something like, particularly when you're Alfonso Cuarón and you're one of the auteurs, getting someone to come up to you and say like, "This thing you love the most, cut it," or like also change it. That would seem like blasphemy to you.
Also, when you're your own editor, which he is,
yeah.
All right. So, well, I'm gonna rewatch Roma. I need to make time for that, and I'm finally going to do that this week.
I need to see the film of his that I am too ashamed to pronounce because it would be offensive.
Y tu mamá también.
Correct. I still refuse to say it, and I'll maybe learn to say it by the time I watch it.
All right. That movie is on Netflix if you have access. So, or at least it was last I checked. So.
Well, thank you, Brenda, for letting me steal it all the time, and I will do that.
Ooh, don't tell them that. Netflix don't like that. But anyway, that is that. So I think that about brings us to the close of this episode.
I think so. I have no clue what I'm. I think maybe I'll talk about more Latin American film, depending on what we're doing. Maybe I'll be able to finally talk about the films I'm discussing in my China film class. Cause maybe we'll be finally able to fucking actually access them, other than through. Sometimes you will just listen to it and it just sounds like death because it's just such a poor print, and it's really a shame because some of them are quite good.
Yeah, well, that just speaks to again the importance of film preservation.
Yeah. Sometimes even for films we don't really like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but even we have these potential masterpieces that are just being lost.
They're like how much of like original silent film is just lost forever?
Oh man, just so much.
It's like a ridiculous number.
Staggering. I can't think of it right now.
I think there's actually a film. There's like a couple of filmmakers out there who try to make a film try to remake lost films. It's like a really fascinating process.
Interesting.
I think I'll forward y'all the video.
Okay.
That like references those.
There was also a movie about like they found like a cache of like previously thought lost silent films in this city, and I think in Alaska. There's a documentary about that came out in 2017, I think. But anyway, Garrett, do you have any idea what you are going to talk about next time?
I'm going to take a stab at rewatching Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Oh boy! All right.
The other Alfonso Cuarón film I could have talked about, but didn't because that's a whole nother can of worms that also like kind of goes beyond Mr. Cuarón.
Well, we'll just cannot get off of this Cuarón kick over here on the Hack Fraud Show.
He's a fascinating filmmaker.
He really is. There's a lot to unpack there. Anyway, we will all see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us. And enjoy your lives, I guess.
Try to survive.
Yeah. Please. Survive.
It's very cold out there.
Please.
Bring a jacket.